Welcome to today's webinar, Simplify and Accelerate Your Enterprise App Development. I'm Wade Roush. I'm a technology journalist and audio producer based here in rainy Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'll be your moderator today for our discussion. For many decades, from the beginning of the computer revolution, you had to be a software engineer to write software code. And if you wanted a custom piece of software for your business, by definition, you had to build and maintain a huge team of developers to do that. One of the big limitations in business has always been the supply of software developers. Now, that started to change in the mid-2010s with the emergence of an approach called low-code. And with low-code development tools, companies for the first time could start to use pre-configured elements and a visual development approach to assemble and test new apps a lot faster, without having to rely on a team of professional developers who can code every single element by hand. That said, the first few generations of apps that you could actually build using low-code tools were pretty simple. And what's happening now is that enterprises are using low-code to build more complex apps that make a real difference in their operations. So today we are joined by two speakers who are going to help us understand how the low-code transformation is happening and what your organization can do to take advantage of it. Our first speaker is Lee Edney. Lee is Regional Vice President for Business Value Consulting in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa at OutSystems. Lee's team is responsible for helping customers understand how to maximize their financial returns and payback from their investment in OutSystems. And prior to OutSystems, Lee worked for many other software companies, helping them and their customers better understand the business value they can achieve with technology. And then we'll hear from Miguel Lopes. Miguel is Vice President for Platform Strategy at OutSystems, and his mission is to scout the market for future IT trends and work with leading analysts to strategize how OutSystems technology directions are aligned with businesses and CIO leaders. He helps to keep OutSystems focused on giving every company the power to innovate through software. And he has over 20 years of experience working and living in the US, Europe, and South America, leading top-performing teams from technical planning to product management, sales, and pre-sales. Now I'd like to hand it over to our first speaker. Lee, welcome.
Very good introduction, so thank you very much for that. And good morning, good afternoon to everybody on the webinar today. Thanks very much for spending some time with us this afternoon. There's a few areas and topics that we're going to touch upon today. As Wade said, the world of software development is changing. That's being driven by some quite interesting trends that we're seeing at a macroeconomic level in terms of just the sheer amount of software that's being built. So we're going to share with you some insight into some of the trends that we're seeing there. We're also going to talk a little bit about some of the different approaches that we're seeing for how companies are modernizing their application development. And also as part of that, why organizations are using low code as one of the ways to help them to achieve that. Within that, we'll also touch upon the low code market itself. So it's a fairly broad market. There's lots of different vendors. There's lots of different approaches and use cases. So hopefully we'll try and untangle some of that and give you some insight into the sort of different areas that we see and how different vendors sit into different places. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about the future of application development. So what are the trends that we see from here on out, and how is the market adapting to be able to support some of those trends? Just before we jump on into that very first section, we have a quick poll actually for the audience. So just to get a little bit of a feel for the audience's experience of low code, just wondering if you could share with us what your organization's experience is, from heavy adoption, expert users, down through to more limited experimentation, all the way down to, this is the first time that I've heard of it. Interesting for us, of course, to get a little bit of a sense. We obviously talk to lots of organizations that are aware of low code, but it's a very large market. There's hundreds of thousands of companies that are building software out there. So, we know that that's not always the case across the wider market. As well. 3% of people said heavy adoption with expert users, 4% said considerable usage, 13% are saying some limited experimentation, 47% are saying aware of it but haven't used it, and 34% are saying never heard of it. So, okay, great. So, it looks like we have a number of people here that have fairly limited exposure to it. So hopefully we can spend some time today and sort of bring some of this stuff to life for you guys. So just to give some insight into why low code and some of the challenges that low code is seeking to address. If you look at what's been happening across the last 10 years in particular or so, I'd say, there's been an absolute explosion of business software. If you just look at the sheer number of SaaS vendors that are operating globally now, there's a huge variety of software, and we're seeing software vendors that are building applications to solve more and more specific problems, right? So even if you look in, just an example that we've got here, a typical marketing stack, you can see that there are dozens of different software applications doing different things. Now, of course, multiply that out across all of the other tech stacks that you've got in operations, supply chain, finance, and elsewhere. And what you end up with is an enormous software estate that begins to build up. You can start to see some of the research that we do, even for small and mid-sized organizations, their application estates are generally extending to around about 240 applications. And that grows significantly then as we start to get into enterprise and large enterprise. So there's this huge growth in the amount of software that companies are deploying. And obviously that's then putting pressure on the development market to be able to keep pace with that. Either if they're custom applications and need to be built from scratch, or if they're commercial applications and they require customization and integration and all of those other things as well. The net effect of all of that is, if Forrester are predicting that just the US alone will have a deficit of 500,000 software developers by 2021, and that number is going to grow significantly across the coming years as well. Contrast to that, you can see there some figures. So 450 million applications that are going to be built across the next 5 years using low-code tools. So that's just in low-code. That doesn't include other forms of application as well. So the number of apps that are needed is growing exponentially, and the ability of the software development world to keep up with that is very much struggling. We can start to see this gulf widening. So, there's a huge lost opportunity that's being created. Obviously, organizations need software, and that software has intrinsic value to them. It's helping them to automate processes. It's helping them to drive out cost, improve customer experiences. Whatever the purposes of that software are, there's value in that. So if I'm not able to deliver the software that I need, globally, we're missing out on a huge opportunity to capture the value from that software. The analysis around this is saying, globally, that's a $690 billion gap that's forming there. So it's very, very significant. When we start to look at some of the underlying reasons behind that, aside from the fact that there aren't enough developers, the productivity of those developers traditionally has been, low. Development is still a very manual, very unautomated process. It's, developers manually writing code, building applications, often rebuilding things that they've built previously for other projects. So there's a huge opportunity to improve that productivity. The talent opportunity is there. Although we are seeing an increase in the number of developers globally, as you saw before, that still falls way short of where the market actually needs. What we're starting to see is increasing demand. How do I get my junior developers to be able to do things that senior developers were doing? How do I more quickly bring people in so that they can become a productive developer? Particularly if I'm in locations or places where I may not have a large talent pool. We talked about SaaS sprawl. Come back to technical debt in a second. We're also seeing increasing cloud complexity as well. So as companies are starting to migrate their apps and their application development environments out into the cloud, there's this huge proliferation of tools that's occurring. Cloud development is now becoming, a fairly complex beast. So the final one then, technical debt, is an interesting one. So technical debt is the debt that I'm accruing because I'm making shortcuts in the software that I'm developing. So I'm building up days of future remediation work because I don't have the time, I don't have the capacity to develop and build things in the way that I want now. We ran some global research on this last year, and some really, really interesting figures. So you can see there, bad code is costing businesses $6,000 a second. So The more software we build, the more technical debt mounts up. The more technical debt mounts up, the harder it becomes to remediate that. And so, we have this growing and escalating problem that we're starting to see building. When we look at cloud computing, the kind of world is moving towards this more agile way of developing, and cloud is obviously a really important vehicle to be able to deliver that. The quicker I can build applications and get them into production and scale them up, the quicker I can provision a development environment, all of these things help to increase that agility. If you look at the range of tools that are available to developers now, even if we just look at AWS as an example, there are dozens, hundreds of different services that developers can use, right? And that begins to create complexity in the work that they're doing. Particularly when we start to think about organizations that are more and more adopting a multi-cloud strategy, what we then start to see is that this problem gets replicated across all of the different cloud vendors that I'm using. So you can see some examples there of, just the typical number of tools that a developer would need to leverage or use as part of their day-to-day work. So the backdrop to this is that there is this huge increasing demand for applications. Developers are few and far between. They're a very scarce resource. And the world's just fundamentally not able to keep up. And so something had to change as part of that. What this is really driving, what we're starting to see is that there's real focus from organizations in terms of how do I modernize software development and delivery. However it's achieved, right, the kinds of problems that organizations are really looking to address is, how do we become more innovative? So how do I spend less time remediating things and fixing technical debt? How do I spend more time innovating and building new interesting products or services? We're often hampered with a lot of legacy software that's very hard to change, right? It makes, our ability to add new products or pricing models, very, very hard. The net effect of all of that is, I have to try and keep the developers that I do have, but there is this constant threat that they might leave and move elsewhere. So, it makes it very, very difficult, particularly for the average organization, to be able to digitize at the rate and the scale that they want. And the net effect of that is things like poor digital experiences, and, we're not, performing well from, when we think about our peers and stuff like that. So we knew that traditional development was very expensive. It's time consuming. It's error prone. We talk about this concept of a digital divide. If I'm a Silicon Valley, software company, then, I do have the engineering capacity, skills, tools to be able to be at the top of my game. But for the vast majority of organizations, we don't operate at that level. And so, these problems, are very real. Just thinking about that, again, we have a second poll question for you. Within your organization, of the challenges that we shared there, which would you say are impacting you the most? So, not having that time to innovate, that legacy software that's difficult and hard to change, scarce and costly development resources, poor digital experiences for customers or employees, or competitive pressure, right? Particularly, if we're starting to see digital upstarts in our industry, things like that, could be eating into our business model. So interested to see what the audience would say are their top challenges around this. So no time to innovate, 28%, legacy software, 36%. Interestingly, there's 62% for scarce and costly resources, 18% for digital experiences, and 13% for competitive pressures. So a good mixture, but resources seems to be standing out, which again sort of feeds back into what we were saying earlier about the 500,000 deficit in the US. So when we start to think about the future of application development, right, we know what the problems are that we need to solve, right? And some companies have been very successful in solving them. So, what does modern application development look like? Well, it allows us to be able to accelerate innovation. It allows us to spend more of our time, effort, and budget on things that are going to create a difference for us. It's significantly higher productivity for developers. How do I automate and remove a lot of that manual, repetitive work that developers are doing, so that I can really get them focusing on high-value tasks? the net effect of that is that we start to optimize that digital experience, right? How does every organization, big or small, create that incredible digital experience, web, mobile apps, everything seamlessly integrated, very low friction. And at the back end to that, what that means is we need a real high level of integration and connectivity. We need to be able to connect things super fast to other data sources. We need to be able to respond as new applications are coming in, make those integrations. We need to think of processes holistically and look at an end-to-end journey. So, that speed and agility becomes super, super important. And of course, we also need enterprise scalability. So, we are seeing lots of local organizations that are now launching global digital products, and accessing markets, outside of their immediate locality. So, these are the general trends. This is what everybody is looking to try to move towards. The benefits of doing that, right? If I can reduce the need to handwrite code, right, and if I can significantly increase the speed at which those applications are built, I can launch those products. I can start to fill in the gaps in the processes that I've got. We see lots of organizations where they're looking at how do I keep a clean core system of record and pull all of my customization out around it, because that means if I have to upgrade SAP or whatever other core system I'm using, that makes that migration path significantly easier. That reduces the cost of that. That means more budget for innovation. We're starting to look at things like, the economics around software development, right? So, with traditional development, it is hard, it is expensive. And what that means is lots of applications are off radar for traditional development. I'm forced to buy commercial applications, which then also means I'm forced to use the functionality that's enforced upon me. I'm forced to, be subject to the vendor's roadmap, right? I don't have full control over that. So we're seeing this real big shift, right, in terms of what that modern application development needs to deliver from an outcome perspective. And obviously this is where we start to then, sort of get into low code and kind of how low code is connected to these. So Miguel, if I just jump on to...
Thank you, Lee. And that is a good preamble to us explaining a bit more to these 62% that, are not really utilizing it yet. What does it mean in practice to apply this to modernizing your capabilities of software development? But nothing better than actually starting with a real life example of this working. So pick up this example because Grain Cargo is an interesting customer of ours that utilizes us to do something that had not succeeded for years. So this is a 100-plus-year-old company coming from, transportation logistic today, oriented here in the Nordics of EMEA, Europe, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and so on, transporting only on electric, hundreds of logs. And they really had been for years trying to regain control of their autonomy digitally and gradually go to the cloud, which really had been stuck for the past two attempts where the past CIOs had gone and entered and gone without succeeding, because it was always a monolith and elephant approach to you take everything to the cloud or nothing, including the classic ERP. And what Ingo Pass, the CIO at this company, did recently, a few years back, was say, guys, we won't get a different result if we keep trying the same way with those upgrades to the clouds of ERP with multi-year plans and getting stuck at the same functionality. So he started a new approach of envisioning, for example, slices of the data being utilized out of the systems of records they had, in this case, an SAP, utilizing first on cloud things like business analytics, BI, analyzing that data, and gradually starting to have, mirrors of that data in the cloud already, capabilities with local development to start brokering functionality, putting real-time information in portals that they had on that BI, and taking it further to field services applications that allow them, for example, to immediately trigger an insurance claim right out from the dock where, there was a problem with a wagon that needs to be registered, and it triggers an insurance ticket to be flown even across borders. And what they love about it is the ability to do this incrementally, to do parallel track, right? They are both incrementally trying the cloud as well as developing code, and basically overcoming that talent problem that everybody says, no time or not enough developers, because they could regain with a small staff the power they get with a platform that automates, avoids all the wasted effort, and accelerates their production, gives them autonomy to control. So now you see them utilizing this to operate business functions of big, importance in revenue on top of this platform, because the staff is practically augmented with the platform. You can find more about it in our website online with video webinars from the CIO himself. What is different then, and how does this help a team to modernize? It's not really your grandpa's concept of, RAD and Ks and all those things for those of us that have been around for a few years. This is not the same old thing. Why? Because it's taking to a new level what's possible with a combination of cloud and modeling and best practices of DevOps today. So it's not about pre-built functionality in general at all. It's about the ability to abstract and go to a higher level, what software engineers always wanted to do, of abstracting, hey, why do I reinvent this function of user authentication 20 times? Why don't I encapsulate this? But that's only half of the story. The real story is what you're seeing here, is that because you can now collaborate in a digital product team that can see immediately iterations of their ideas in the user interface, in adding new fields, modifying them in the app, the mobile app, the web app, and seeing immediate impact with a common language. It's the first time that what you see is not only what you get, is the actual code. That model is the code. Just like we don't care how, when the programmer was doing C or C# or Java, what type of compiled code that was going to the CPU, the same thing happens here. This is capable of basically generating the JavaScript, the C#, the HTML, the CSS, everything that is needed, the APK package, but that's a byproduct because you're creating the applications. And so the collaboration on the team, the automation of the software development cycle, and the possibility to do a lot smarter reutilization, catalogs of components, that's what gives these product teams the capability to operate at a different phase. That's what it means with developer productivity. So we wanted to show you a little bit how it looks like when product teams get together, and this is no longer just a domain of, it's only a professional developer that got a requirements thrown over the fence. No, you actually see the teams collaborating, iterating in real time. And so what does this do for your organization, or for example, for Green Cargo is that no matter where the org is at the different stages of digital maturity, whether you're modifying the customer experiences or you're going into the optimization of the processes, or you're even creating new business models with new revenue streams, you basically have those product teams iterating, evolving faster, experimenting faster. You fail fast too, and you go forward with those feedbacks you get from users on what's getting high adoption or not. And so it allows you to go through the stages of new ideas, such as Green Cargo, for example, that started by improving the portal interfaces and then took it to actually the locomotives coordination, and these days is even doing partner APIs with the estimated time of arrivals being available as an app. And so that's the type of mindset that you can iterate in a world like this. But of course, to iterate, to experiment, you first need to build. This is not our sentence. This is Jeff Lawson's, a famous CEO of Twilio. And you can't iterate on something you've bought off the shelf or even something you have as a SaaS, software as a service, that you do some extensions and you do some customization, but in the end, it's on top of the same data domain. I mean, no matter what, if you are using a CRM-based system or an IT ticket-based system, it does not have the comprehensive view of accessing any data source, any SaaS, any database you have. Having your proprietary code that may be in the factory or in the insurance algorithm, and have the ability to do that at a modeling level that takes the team faster on creating those iterations. So iterating, experimenting is the key here. And so that's why there is a need for understanding, okay, but there's a dozen, there are literally dozens and multiple dozens of players, and that we wanted to help a little bit with our experience 20 years in the market as really the founder of the approach as seen in, industry analysts' reports before. We want to share the space of solutions you find in here and how important it is for your use cases, because maybe one makes more sense, maybe the other. So classically, as you look these days into customers, this chart is based on a G2 grid for local development platforms that is based on users' opinions on multiple vendors. So it's not about us. It's about the space of this market having basically 4 categories of solutions. One that is, extending that SaaS plus, where you just, the order process gets with the sales funnel extended to do something. It covers a part of the business. That's fine. There are no-code solutions that help workgroup solutions. I'll show in a second. There are business process management solutions that are these days being resold as low-code, but have a heavy focus on the wave, the actual streams of work, the escalation of the process, but less power on the detailed pixel perfect user experience with design thinking and also on the integration capabilities. And then those that give you the same type of approach as you have with your development teams today with, say, Java, JavaScript, JS, and others, but operating at a higher level of productivity. And so that's the space that has been getting momentum for the reasons I mentioned before, because that digital product team gets a common language to talk, iterate, and experiment. So how do these spaces look typically different in terms of what do you use to do what? Well, if you look at a pyramid, like the portfolio of those 240 average apps per organization that Lee showed from that study, you find there are, a big number of smaller apps that have replaced the Excel little things that were done in departments or a team. There are more important departmental workflows and applications that cross multiple teams. There are some enterprise class applications that, no matter where you're located, cross boundaries, regions and geos and everything. And the actual core, maybe the systems of records that operate even down to the operational technology. And what's interesting is this space is evolving somewhat like this, that you see a great fit for no-code doing those smaller apps that, don't have, for example, to worry so much on who's responsible and accountable for the compliance, the security, the HIPAAs, the California Privacy Protection Act of those apps. Well, they tend to be more of this inside, some between 2 teams, some workflows, some other things. You continue to have the classical BPMs in there. You certainly have the SaaS plus extensions as, hey, if I'm in IT, everything that I see is a ticket. And so it's easy to just open another ticket, even if I do it for sales or for legal approval or procurement processes. I see the world like that. It's easy to extend, but it's not generalized. And then you have these newer platforms for the cloud development with low-code for pros that have a generic data source, a generic approach to the entire stages of software development lifecycle, from design, develop, test, probe, pre-production, production, all of that, but with a holistic approach, without wasted effort. So this gives you a sense of what are the use cases for the types of solutions you can find in the market in here. And that leads us to, so what is becoming common in this area for the capabilities going in the direction of application development future? And so right before we illustrate what they are and what's making them more important, we'll go to the last poll of getting your feeling. For those familiar with the DORA report, DevOps Research Assessment, this is straight out of there. It's about your feeling of your maturity of the organization from the software development and delivery point of view on deployment frequency, lead time for changes, time to restore, and the failure rate. If you have some knowledge, some understanding, some feeling as to your software engineering organization being at an elite level, high level, medium level, or low level. And it doesn't have to be scientific. It's your feeling about it for us too. So as you see, differences here is about, as in the table, some on the elite means you actually publish multiple times per day. That's quite a digital native versus once per day or once per week at high level, or once per week and once per month at a medium level, and lower than that for low level. That gives you a sense of the cadence your team achieves. So I'm very curious about how your feeling is about that current maturity of the software engineering operation as a whole. So I'll recap here with 1% recognizing that elite level is something very hard to do. Same experience as we find. High level of operation here is 11%, medium at 32%, low, common as well, 38%, and don't know, very fair, 18%, so almost 1 out of 5. So, but that gives us a good sense, which is this is the real challenge we all face as software engineering leaders, is how do we move more along the chain of this maturity level, our own operations and teams, to achieve that faster cadence that is expected on the cloud to experiment. And so that helps us to bring back to, okay, so what comes embedded in this, in these platforms that helps us in a cloud environment to be a technology company? I mean, there are aspects, first of all, that obviously have nothing to do with code or platform or technology. It's about people, it's about process, and only at the end it's about tools, right? So first of all, I mean, how are we maturing as an organization to go to have a digital centric, well, unfortunately, as everybody is familiar with the pandemic stage we are in, is that everything accelerated. I don't care if it was 3 years, if it was 5 years, everybody has accelerated those motions. The question is, are we doing it the hard way or the smarter way? Second is this product team mindset. It is not possible that we keep repeating the mistake of IT for 50, 60 years. You define the requirements here and you throw them over the fence to IT over there. It just doesn't work. It has been proven. So it's not just the agile methodology versus waterfall. No, it's really the skills, the diversity, the people that think different, but the ability to talk the same language. I cannot talk to a developer if she's going to write that in Python and I don't understand the thing about Python and I cannot read it. But if I see what the change is happening visually and we collaborate in a room about that, that's different. So this focus of product teams is key, and it's proven in digital natives. And then you have to have that mindset of, where do I spend the time? I mean, we only have maybe in a team 30 developers in a large business unit. How are we allocating, 90% of them to work on the infrastructure, or actually on the business impacting side of the applications and systems? And the amount of time you spend on the other versus the other, one versus the other, tells what are the business outcomes you're going to achieve. So that's logical. And what's being seen is the recommendations we have in 2022 by leaders like Gartner on the recommendations for software engineering leaders as of this year about where to put the focus are clearly on these 4 areas. Cloud native, meaning cloud native development, to address the problem that Lee mentioned at the beginning, that it does not help me to have 240 SaaS. I need to connect these things, interweave them in an experience that is good for the employees, so that is good for the partner, so that is good for the customer. That needs to be really built and iterate, not just use it off the shelf. Second, that developer experience cannot be the same as today. It's a disaster. The technologists like ourselves keep throwing more and more technology to developers without thinking, how is the total experience of the development team really bound together? How holistically, how can I save time to not go from one step to the other with things interconnected? 3, observability, meaning the full sense of adoption. Why are users not using some app we created thinking it was wonderful to fix that problem, if it's an insurance car accident or something? And why are we understanding not just the performance, the latencies, the network, the server, but actually behaviors always embedded with probes and with a feedback loop of people more easily explaining why it doesn't work for them or what they would like. And finally, I don't need explanations how everybody is aware of the security and the problems we are facing. And guess what? That is never solved with a business or citizen development only approach. It needs to have a platform that manages, that has guardrails, traceability logs, and enforcement of roles of what is done by software engineers, what is done by the expanded product team, what is done on the front end, on the back end, and so on. So in the end, this translates into this type of critical capabilities that you see in the market, and that are really about the automation of the full life cycle with CI/CD, the developer experience. They basically translate into these same areas, and you can see that it's already available, not as the vendors say it, but actually based on what users and the experts that compare solutions see it. So instead of me talking about it, I invite you to actually look into the market comparisons where you can find this. You can find, for example, at Gartner Peer Insights is a peer network of users evaluating actual usage of development platforms in that market space. Same thing in G2. G2 was the diagram I was showing you a while ago when comparing business applications and for your size of organization, trust radius. And if you want to get more technical, you go, for example, into the low-code application market Magic Quadrant from Gartner, or if you happen to be a lucky seat holder of a Gartner research seat, you can actually ask for the technical solution comparison of the best vendors in the planet that check all those modern application requirements, and that really give you a sense, is it the best for my use case for what you're trying to do on modernizing? Eventually, if you care a lot about experiences and the experience development, there's another Magic Quadrant from Gartner on multi-experience development platform. Those that have the links will share you have ways of downloading from our site, but check for yourself. And Forrester has been the leader actually in evaluating this space for more years and separating what is done for product teams and pros versus what is done for just citizen developments. They have separate evaluations for that. So that said, it brings us back to saying this is a chance for you to really change the way how your teams are operating, reducing the complexity you have seen on the cloud, and bringing that stage of elite performance that only 1% of you said it was attainable, that actually see it in practice. This QR code, as we'll share, will be a chance for you to either talk to an expert and even get a direct access to an edition free forever on your own. So you get your own opinion, not just customers and analysts. But we are here for you today for questions and answers. And that's what we're going to do now. So
thank you, Miguel. And thank you, Lee. Yes, it's now time for the Q&A portion of the webinar. I loved the green cargo example, partly because I just love railroads, kind of a train buff. What kinds of businesses or sectors of the economy are best suited for low-code development approaches and apps? And can you share another favorite example maybe of a situation where a low-code app achieved exactly what was needed, maybe even perhaps better than a custom-written app would have? And by the same token, what kinds of apps still need to be written by professional developers? Is there a type of project you would advise customers not to try using low code?
First way, allow me to make a small clarification, which is this is being utilized by professional developers. That's the change we see. So as an example, two examples to your question. One in the US, one in Europe about that. So in the US, for example, one of our customers operating in the Midwest, a hospital that is increasing the direct management digitally of benefits that benefits administration that are paid by companies like Humana and others doing that type of process, had the challenge to make it more real-time, more integrated, and doing it in the cloud. And this person, this lady, was a chief digital officer for that business unit, had only 10 developers, and started finding she could do more with services that are on the cloud with her professional developers, and allocated some 3 of them, for example, to operate on AWS services like we were seeing. And the moment they started spending more time and improving how they could use the storage, the AI for OCR recognition, for whatever, they found out that the business was asking them for multi-cloud, for example. and they would have to hire another 3 people to do, for Microsoft and another 3 to Google. So it just was a disaster because you cannot afford to allocate 9/10 of the team to just the infrastructure. So one example on why this is being helpful for people doing the cloud move in terms of development. Second example on the serious type of systems. Vopak is the oldest enterprise in Europe, and inherited from the Western Indian company in the Netherlands, that is 400 years old, and that operates terminals of fuel storage across the world in 76 locations. And they had a major supply chain management software, I will not name, that they have operated for 16 years that needed to have the different versions in different countries, data protection, Singapore, China, Holland, Brazil, the US. And they had troubles in how long they were spending in traditional development to adapt, configure for the specifics of each one. What they've done is working throughout a longer cycle in this case, because it's a full ERP replacement of Vopak, V-O-P-A-K, in the Netherlands, that they actually operate down to the level of the terminal management system, all the way from the accounts payable, accounts receivable, and contracts. Everything has encapsulations of code development that this is not cookie cutter. This is a modeling that basically generates the same code that you are generating with traditional development today, but at a much faster rate. So those would be 2 examples that are easy to find and I think illustrate both the use cases and the applicability.
What about the second half of my question, though? Is there any sector or any project that is just of the scale or complexity that it would be just too much to try a low-code approach, whether you've got pros around or not?
Absolutely. Very good question. That happens all the time. So I believe we are really fit for solving enterprise business processes that engage some kind of interfaces, whether, user interface or APIs, headless apps between organizations. We are not, this is not the type of technology you want to use if you are Volkswagen building an embedded software system inside the car to manage the battery, or if you are, one of these recently acquired Blizzard, gaming companies that you're trying to optimize yes, those are not spaces. But otherwise, there is no specific, we have not just us, but the players in the market here have certainly customers across 24 vertical industries, because this is about a modern age of software development that is not a cookie cutter approach. This is not a restricted to something approach.
I have a question maybe that Lee can answer, because this relates to your part of the presentation. So you did talk about technical debt. How do you clear out technical debt with a low-code approach? Could you explain the connection there in your mind?
It's a great question. I mean, I think there's sort of several ways that we try to achieve that, right? So number one is, we're giving more power and more speed to the developers, right? So if you look at one of the common causes of technical debt, it's that, we're making shortcuts in a project because the project is running over time, over budget, and we're under pressure to be able to deliver things, right? And so the more productive I can make my developers, the less likely I am to make some of those shortcuts as part of it. What we then also have is actually built into the product are a number of different functional capabilities that help to reduce that, right? So as you saw earlier on the visual, we have a visual design interface. So as you're building the application visually, we're creating the underlying code around that, and then the quality of that underlying code is very, very high. It's been extensively tested. So that also goes towards helping to reduce technical debt. We also have then things like architecture dashboard, which is a way where you can visualize the architecture of an application or an estate of applications, and you can start to see where technical debt is building up, so that as the product team or as the development team that are working on that, we use AI and other tools to help to identify where that accrual may be occurring and then again, obviously with low code, generally speaking, low code allows developers to do things somewhere between 3 to 7 times faster than they would normally do. So if I see the technical debt and I need to make changes to that code, again, it's infinitely easier and quicker for me to be able to do that. So there's a number of different ways that we, would support the reduction of that.
Great answer. Here's a slightly technical question, I guess. It's just kind of an architecture question, and I'm not sure whether Miguel or Lee want to grab it, but what's your view on separating data from the application? When you're building a low-code application, is it a prerequisite for low-code to separate out the data?
I'll take it. So very good question, because that's real life happening every day, and the example of green cargo started even there. We assume by a good principles of architecture that is the case. So an aspect that is definitely out of those evaluation criteria for the platforms in this space is how good is the integration capability, meaning how you access the data source, the controls of access to people and resources, segmentation that you can give to the different classes of developers, for example, you have running in the platform, and the different resources of data. Not everybody can certainly access an SAP pricing BAPI and make a change. That's not going to be the case. The beauty is that by importing these APIs in a visual way that stays connected, this is not like a fabrication or a mirror clone, by actually having it visually available in the model for the app development, that control of data separation at two levels. One, on who gets access to it, and two, in terms of runtime, you have your external database, you have your SaaS, database, DBS, and that can be a source of data that is utilized to feed the data that is utilized in the application. So by all means, that is one of the best practices we apply in architecture design with 3-layer canvas, for example.
It's almost a prerequisite then. It's baked in. That's an assumption that you will be doing that. Great. Here's a question that's more about HR, I guess, and hiring. So how should folks think about hiring no-code or low-code engineers as opposed to full-time, full-stack engineers?
One of the sort of interesting points of feedback that we get from customers is, as I said earlier, is this sort of a concept of, junior developers can now do the work that previously was preserved for more senior developers, right? So what we are starting to see is that a lot of the customers that we work with are looking at building programs to be able to bring people in direct from university or, through some kind of training, vocational courses, and very, very quickly they're getting them to a point where, they're starting to become very productive. Like we have a manufacturing customer, and there's a very complex ERP system with hundreds of different data tables in it. Any development work that was needed to be done in there was only a handful of developers that had the skills to be able to do that. What they've been able to do is extract functionality out of that. They now have a team of developers that are on a much lower salary base. They can do that work outside of the ERP system without interfering with it. And so, the dynamics of, or the dynamics around the cost base of what their development team looks like have changed significantly as a result of being able to do that. I think obviously there is a level of technical proficiency that's required. You couldn't throw someone like me at it and have me productive. But, if you've had people that have gone and trained and, they understand programming, they're going to find that within a very short period of time, like a couple of months, they're in a position where they're fairly proficient on the platform. Anything you'd add to that, Miguel?
I'd like to add something that has been surprising us from the experience. For example, customers like an insurance in Australia that told us the best people they shifted to the new paradigm of development were COBOL developers. COBOL, almost retired developers. So both on the young side as well, and it's not about age you have across, diversity, but why? Because they were, A, frustrated with not having caught up with some of, the crazy Angular, reactive JS frameworks, jumps, loops, and backs. And B, they had a good understanding the business processes that were taking place, the flow. And it was much more logical for them to see this visual flow and be capable of operating on it by jumping to this technology rather than just, going into completely understanding a new language on a text-based mode only that they cannot collaborate with other users. So it's funny, you see two things. One, younger generations have it totally built in, almost that I can learn from YouTube, I can learn from using apps, I can learn from platforms. Open-ended. You have some people that expand the pool from not being professional developers, but actually maybe they have an engineering background or very structured. They like workflows in procurement, and they start extending that because they were the Excel the developers to some other people that are, business passion. So it's really a wide spectrum.
A couple of very quick questions because we have a ton of questions stacking up here. What's the smallest company that has ever successfully used low-code development in your experience? Are there one-person companies that do this?
Yeah, I mean, we have startups that are building new products on OutSystems, right? And pretty much from day one, you know, they might be, I don't know if they would be one person necessarily, but they might only be a small handful
but startups
of people.
For sure. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Another lightning question. How robust are low-code apps compared to apps written, you know, by larger teams or in other languages?
Very good. I'll pick that one as well. So one of the fundamental concepts we hear, and I'll pick RealFX as an example, a manufacturer of airbags in California that has to provide proofs of 5-star security testing to their customers, right, on how they develop the code operating all the way from the manufacturing to the devices, has told us this. They can slip, I mean, this lady, again, there was a lady ahead of it, can slip at night in a way they could not before, because the fact that these 212 different checkpoints we do from, you know, encryption of code in pipe, at rest, how you may disaggregate that data access, for example, to have tokens and then anonymize it for the access on the API, and anything else that goes in between of security scanning, such as software composition analysis, is being done not one time, not by one person of the team, but 100% of the apps. Every time you click on the button that says single-step deployment, we created one-click publish, patented it, and it applies all of that every time. So that's one of the things, is that the mindset of shifting left, the security test you should be doing when I add a new field to the table, to the database, to the actual publication of the app going in production, whatever, you have a bunch of those steps embedded. And so we can actually give you warnings on that same architecture dashboard we were telling about. Here are things that may not be good for security reasons. You may want to check out with an expert for something else to be done if that is not something tackled by the platform itself.
I want to wrap up with one final question for both of you, and it's this. So please answer in the length of a tweet, which these days is 280 characters. I won't count, but what's the one thing that companies need to know in order to successfully adopt a low-code approach to app creation? If you could say one thing, 280 characters.
I would say I don't know if this is going to, it's as much about the people and the process around the development as it is about the technology, because it's a culture change for how you build software. And if you can nail that, you'll do good with this.
Miguel, I'll give you a shot at that one too.
Oh, I cannot improve on Liz. I would say if you're ready to change by experimenting, then you're ready to see it with your own eyes. That's it.
I want to thank both of our speakers today, Lee Edney and Miguel Lopes, and thank you to our audience. I want to say a final thank you to OutSystems for sponsoring and presenting at today's webinar, and we're grateful for your expertise on this important topic.